Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Changes in the U.S. Housing Stock and Rental Market Dynamics. I am Sean Buckles, Head Statistical Officer and Director of Housing and Demographic Analysis at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. And I'm your host for today's presentation. HUD and the U.S. Census Bureau collaborate to collect comprehensive data on the U.S. housing stock through the American Housing Survey. A unique characteristic of the American Housing Survey is that it collects data on the same housing units every 2 years so that analysts can track what happens to housing units over time. To take advantage of this unique characteristic of the American Housing Survey, HUD has funded 2 studies to document how the housing stock evolves between successive American Housing Survey years. These studies are funded by HUD and authored by Fred Eggers and Fouad Momin of the consulting firm Econometrica. Today, we're going to discuss these 2 studies. The first is called the Components of Inventory Change Report, which we refer to as the CINCH report. The second is called the Rental Market Dynamics report. In this presentation, we'll discuss some of the key sections of these 2 reports and dig into some of the findings from the study period between the 2015 and 2017 American Housing Surveys. I want to make webinar participants aware that these 2 reports are not yet published. Today's webinar is to give you a sneak peek at some of the results. Both the CINCH and the Rental Market Dynamics reports are scheduled to be published by the end of August and will be available on HUD's website. Today's webinar will begin with a formal presentation covering the 2 reports. After the formal presentation, I will be back to lead a panel discussion of the 2 reports. For that panel, I will be joined by 2 special guests. Dav Vandenbroek is a senior economist at HUD. Dav developed some of the original techniques for the CINCH and Rental Market Dynamics reports when the CINCH program began in 1992. We'll also be joined by Dr. Catherine Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a consultant working with HUD on affordable housing issues. Finally, after our panel discussion, we will take your questions. Before we get started with the formal presentation, a reminder. During our discussion, or at any point during this webinar, please feel free to post your questions in the question box, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end. Now, please listen to this formal presentation on the CINCH and Rental Market Dynamics reports, and I'll be back shortly.
What is the American Housing Survey? The American Housing Survey is the nation's most comprehensive housing survey. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, funds and provides oversight for the survey. The U.S. Census Bureau, or Census, collects the data. The American Housing Survey has provided current and continuous data on the U.S. housing stock and the people who occupy America's households since 1973. These days, the American Housing Survey is conducted every 2 years. We recently finished the 2019 data collection period, and we are looking forward to conducting the next American Housing Survey in 2021. HUD uses American Housing Survey data to examine issues that are critical to advancing our mission, improving our effectiveness, and designing housing programs that meet the needs of different target groups, including first-time homebuyers and older Americans. Policy analysts, program managers, and budget analysts in federal, state, and local governments use American Housing Survey data to monitor housing supply and demand, as well as changes in housing conditions and costs. Private organizations, including trade associations, use American Housing Survey data to study issues important to our member communities. Finally, academic researchers at our nation's universities and think tanks use the American Housing Survey data to gain a deeper understanding of housing policy issues, including housing affordability for low-income renters. The American Housing Survey provides current information on a wide range of core housing topics. Core housing topics are included in every survey and include the size and composition of the nation's housing inventory, vacancies, heating and cooking fuel usage, the physical condition of housing units, characteristics of occupants, equipment breakdowns, home improvements, mortgages and other housing costs, persons living in or eligible for assisted housing, home values, and characteristics of recent movers. In addition to the core topics, the American Housing Survey includes a series of rotating topical modules that collect data on a wide variety of housing-related topics of special interest to HUD and the American Housing Survey user community. These rotating modules provide unique insights on topics like health and safety hazards in the home, food insecurity, the use of housing counseling services, the presence of arts and cultural opportunities in the community, neighborhood characteristics, delinquent rent or mortgage payments, and emergency and disaster preparedness, among others. The American Housing Survey is a nationwide survey that is designed to produce national estimates for 25 large metropolitan areas, and estimates for certain states. You can find more information on the American Housing Survey, including several tutorial videos and documents on how to use tools like the American Housing Survey Table Creator and Codebook online at census.gov/programs-surveys/AHS. Now, for today's topic, changes in the U.S. housing stock and rental dynamics. First, let's take a look at the components of inventory change study for 2015 to 2017. The components of inventory change report, or CINCH, measures changes in the characteristics of the housing stock of the United States. Using data collected from the American Housing Survey, which is conducted every 2 years, the CINCH report compares characteristics of individual housing units across time. This comparison allows researchers to see not only changes in the characteristics of housing units, but also changes in the characteristics of the unit's occupants. The CINCH report contains information on the characteristics of units added and removed from the housing stock. This report, which is the latest in the CINCH report series, describes how the housing stock evolved between 2015 and 2017. The report is organized into 5 sections. Each section explores a different aspect of inventory change. After the introduction presented in Section 1, Section 2 of the CINCH report examines overall changes in the housing stock between 2015 and 2017. Section 2 details losses to the housing stock due to demolitions or other methods, and additions to the housing stock through new construction and other methods. Section 3 of the CINCH report compares the pattern of changes between 2015 and 2017 to the pattern of changes in previous 2-year periods dating back to 2001. Section 4 identifies the components of the housing stock that experienced unusually high losses and unusually large gains between 2015 and 2017. And Section 5 of the CINCH report highlights groups of units that remained in the housing stock between 2015 and 2017 but experienced unusually high changes in characteristics. Let's look at some key highlights from Section 2 of the CINCH study. The data show 3 notable changes occurred in the 2015 housing stock in the period between the 2015 American Housing Survey and the 2017 AHS. Some housing units left the stock. Some units remained in the housing stock but underwent changes, and some units were added to the stock. None of these processes are as simple as they sound. The CINCH study examines all 3 types of changes in the housing stock. CINCH identifies subsets of the housing stock with unusually high levels of losses or additions. It also identifies subsets where a high proportion of units stayed in the housing stock but were no longer in the same subset in the 2015 American Housing Survey data as in the 2017 AHS. First, let's examine the losses to the housing stock. The American Housing Survey classifies losses as temporary or permanent. A housing unit is considered to be a temporary loss if it might return to the housing stock at a later date. Examples of temporary losses include mobile home sites that have become vacant or houses used for business purposes, such as dentist offices or tax preparer offices. A permanent loss is a unit that cannot return to the housing stock in its current form. Examples of permanent losses are units destroyed by fire or natural disaster, a house's relocation, a mobile home moved to a different site, or the reconfiguring of a single unit into multiple units, or the combining of multiple units into one. For a unit to be considered a loss in 2017, it must have been in the housing stock in 2015. This chart shows 9 types of temporary losses and 7 types of permanent losses. By 2017, the CINCH study found the 2015 housing stock had experienced the loss of 2,093,700 units. These losses were divided almost evenly between 1,084,400 units temporary losses and 1,009,300 units permanent losses, a difference of only about 75,000 units. Here are some examples of temporary losses to the housing stock revealed in the latest CINCH report. 141,900 units became permanent or temporary business or commercial storage. 101,900 mobile home sites that were occupied in 2015 were vacant in 2017. 128,500 units were converted to an institutional unit. 65,200 units were prohibited from occupancy. It is important to note, although temporary losses may eventually leave the stock permanently, conceptually they are recoverable. Here are some examples of permanent losses revealed in the CINCH study. 325,200 units were demolished or destroyed by fire or natural disaster by 2017. 145,500 mobile homes, not on lots, were moved by 2017. 53,300 units split into multiple units, and 68,900 units merged with other units. None of these units can be recovered in the same form as the original 2015 unit, so they are considered permanent losses. The largest category of temporary losses were units lost in ways that do not fall into any of the other categories being tracked, or not otherwise classified. 364,000 units fall into this category. Similarly, there are 2 undefined permanent loss categories that account for the loss of 410,200 units. Now, let's look at additions to the housing stock. This chart shows the 2017 housing stock grew by 3,655,800 units between the time period of the 2015 American Housing Survey period and the 2017 AHS. These additions to the housing stock are from 3 primary sources: new construction of 2,102,700 units, 1,050,300 units that were considered temporary losses in 2015 but were recovered by 2017, and 502,800 units added after 2015 by means other than new construction. For housing stock additions, there also is a large, not otherwise classified component that accounts for 500,700 units. When we look at the first source of housing stock additions, new construction, it is important to note the findings in CINCH for 2017 overestimate new construction due to changes in the American Housing Survey that began in 2015. The second major source of housing stock additions, recovered units, includes 106,500 units used in 2015 for business or commercial storage, 108,800 mobile homes that moved to sites unoccupied in 2015, 132,000 units used in 2015 as institutional housing, 74,900 units where occupancy had been prohibited, and 127,400 units whose interiors were exposed to the elements in 2015. To determine the estimate for the third source of housing stock additions, 502,800 non-new construction units, housing stock additions in the 2017 American Housing Survey built prior to 2017 were categorized as other additions. Non-new construction units includes older mobile homes that moved between 2015 and 2017 and new units resulting from the splitting or merging of older units. That concludes our summary of Section 2 of the CINCH report, overall changes in the housing stock between 2015 and 2017. Now, let's look at Section 3 of the CINCH report, which looks at changes to the housing stock between 2001 and 2017, and see the historical perspective it provides for the growth that occurred between 2015 to 2017. This chart compares the 2015 to 2017 growth to 6 previous CINCH analyses, dating back to 2001. The analysis of this data yielded several important findings. First, the data show the impact of the financial crisis, which began in 2006, and the economic recession that followed. The impact is reflected in the slower growth we see in the 2007 to 2009 and the 2009 to 2011 periods. We see growth between 2015 and 2017 was typical for the entire 2001 to 2017 interval. Of the 7 periods, the 2015 to 2017 period experienced the third highest growth at 2,613,000 units. The data show the normal growth experienced between 2015 and 2017 follows abnormally low growth of only 413,000 units from 2011 to 2013. In fact, the gross flow into and out of the housing stock during the 2011 to 2013 period of 3.4 million units was small by historical standards. By comparison, the average gross flow over the 7 periods was 5.8 million units. The key takeaway here: the growth and gross flow numbers suggest the housing market slowed during the 2011 to 2013 period and returned to normal between 2015 to 2017. Now, let's take a quick look at what the study reveals about where losses and additions were notably large, which is discussed in Section 4 of the CINCH study. This section examines how loss and addition rates vary by different characteristics of the units or the households occupying them. Appendix A presents information on losses and additions for 135 overlapping segments of the housing market, defined by factors such as structure type, year built, number of rooms, region, quality, tenure, and householder characteristics. Using these data, this section describes segments of the housing stock where losses were most likely to occur, or segments which benefited most from additions. The chart is too large to show in this presentation, but let's examine some of the most noteworthy changes in losses and additions the study reveals. For example, the CINCH study revealed occupied units have lower loss rates and addition rates. Vacant units and seasonal units have much higher loss rates and addition rates. The data show there is no meaningful variation in loss rates and addition rates by metropolitan status, non-metropolitan status, or census division. And loss rates increase as the age of the unit increases. The study also shows smaller units have higher loss rates, but also higher addition rates. By 2 different measures of unit quality, the data show poorer units have higher loss and addition rates. At the same time, loss rates and addition rates show little variation across market segments defined by the age, race, and ethnicity of householders, household type, or the presence or absence of children in the household. This means the displacement resulting from losses appears to equally affect all households. We also see owner-occupied units have lower loss and addition rates than all housing types. Renter-occupied units have higher loss and addition rates. And loss rates for both renter-occupied and owner-occupied housing are highest for the least expensive housing. Addition rates are highest for the most expensive renter-occupied and owner-occupied housing. Finally, let's look at market segments where unit or household characteristics changed between 2015 and 2017, which is discussed in Section 5 of the study. In addition to measuring losses and additions and detailing the different ways in which units can leave and enter the housing stock, CINCH analysis shows units in the stock that changed characteristics between 2015 and 2017. Appendix B of the report shows the percentage of 2015 units that were in a different segment in 2017 by market segment. Appendix B also shows the percentage of units in 2017 that came from a different segment in 2015. As I noted earlier, the data chart in the appendix is too large to show in this presentation, but we've pulled some key highlights for our discussion today. For instance, we see occupied units were stable between survey years. Approximately 60% of vacant units and 50% of seasonal units had changed in the previous or following survey year. The CINCH study shows while approximately 12% of severely inadequate units in 2015 left the stock, approximately 75% of the remaining severely inadequate units transitioned to either adequate or moderately inadequate in 2017. Among units with problems, the number of problems noted in the period between survey years changed in at least 75% of units. For both measures of quality, the 2015 to 2017 experience shows if a unit remains in the stock, problems will be fixed and are not long-standing. We also see groups defined by the demographic characteristics of the occupant household seem to be relatively stable between surveys. None of the changes observed seem unusually high, given households move and household composition changes over time. And one last finding here. The CINCH study reports approximately 20% of renter-occupied units were either owner-occupied, vacant, or seasonal in the previous survey year. Now, let's take a look at the 2015 to 2017 Rental Market Dynamics Report. The Rental Market Dynamics study is similar to the CINCH study. In fact, the Rental Market Dynamics Report uses the CINCH methodology to study how the rental market evolved between 2015 and 2017, with a special focus on affordable rental housing. The Rental Market Dynamics Report uses American Housing Survey data to detail what happened in the rental housing market between the two survey years. The Rental Market Dynamics Report focuses on the entire rental stock. The rental stock includes occupied rental units, vacant rental units, vacant units offered for sale or rent, and units rented but not yet occupied. Like the CINCH study, the Rental Market Dynamics study is organized into key sections. We will highlight a few in this presentation. First, let's look at Section 2 of the report, which discusses changes in rental housing between 2015 and 2017. Between 2015 and 2017, the rental housing stock experienced almost no growth and became more expensive. This chart shows how the total stock of renter-occupied units increased by only 2,000 units over the two-year period. Equally notable is how sharply monthly housing costs increased for rentals. Despite almost no growth in total renter-occupied units, the most expensive cohort, rents of $1,250 a month or more, increased by more than 2 million renters. Median monthly rents rose from $923 to $991. It's important to note that this chart uses the AHS measure of total housing costs, which for rentals is the sum of rent, any utility costs paid separately, and related housing costs, such as rental insurance. Economists use the term gross rent for the measure total housing costs. To assess affordability, the Rental Market Dynamics Report uses 8 categories. Non-market affordability includes no cash rent or a subsidized rent. Extremely low rent describes units affordable to renters with incomes equal to 30% of local area median income. Very low rent represents units affordable to renters with incomes equal to 50% of local area median income. Low rent describes units affordable to renters with incomes equal to 60% of local area median income. Moderate rent refers to units affordable to renters with incomes equal to 80% of local area median income. High rent describes units affordable for renters with incomes equal to 100% of local area median income. Very high rent describes units affordable to renters with incomes equal to 120% of local area median income. And extremely high rent includes all other rental units with cash rents. For each category, affordable is defined as a gross rent-to-income ratio of 30% or less for incomes that define the boundary for that category. The categories are defined relative to area median income, with an adjustment for the number of bedrooms in the unit. Now, let's take a look at the rental housing stock, occupied and vacant, by affordability from 2015 to 2017. This chart shows changes in the rental housing stock when we broaden the definition of the rental stock to include vacant units for rent. We see an increase of 61,000 units. The number of extremely low rent units increased by 644,000 between 2015 and 2017, but the non-market, very low rent, and low rent categories all lost units during this period. The decline in very low rent rentals was particularly large at 1,620,000 units. It took gains in all categories, from moderate rent to extremely high rent, to offset the rental stock losses from the more affordable categories. Now, let's discuss the fundamental structure of rental dynamics analysis. A unique strength of the American Housing Survey is its longitudinal sample. HUD drew a new AHS sample for 2015 as part of a major redesign. The same sample was interviewed again in 2017 and will be interviewed in the future at 2-year intervals. Observing the same sample units enables HUD to observe changes over time. For example, we can identify all rental sample cases in 2015 and see what their status was in 2017. There are 3 broad alternative outcomes. First, some sample cases that were rentals in 2015 may remain rentals in 2017 and still be in the same affordability category. Second, some sample cases that were rentals in 2015 may remain rentals in 2017 but be in a different affordability category. Finally, some sample cases that were rentals in 2015 may not be rentals in 2017. This outcome has several variants. Some 2015 sample cases may be part of the owner stock in 2017. Some 2015 sample cases may have become part of the seasonal or second home stock. Some 2015 sample cases may no longer be in the housing stock. They can be lost to the housing stock, either temporarily or permanently. This chart presents the 3 broad alternative outcomes. Instead of counting individual sample cases, it attaches weights to those cases that enables us to track the total rental stock as of 2015, all 48,682,000 available rental units from 2015 to 2017. The Rental Market Dynamics study defines this as the forward-looking analysis because it details what may have happened to 2015 rentals by the year 2017. This chart shows the data as percentages. For example, there were 9,344,000 very low rent units in 2015. 44.4% were still classified as very low rent in 2017. 12.7% of very low rent units had become more affordable in 2017. 27.8% had become less affordable. 5.2% were no longer classified as rentals. Within the group not classified as rentals in 2017, 7.9% of the original 9,344,000 units were part of the owner stock. 4.6% were seasonal or usual residence elsewhere, URE units. 2.7% had left the stock. These charts allow data users to track the evolution of the 2015 rental stock by affordability categories and by the total rental housing stock. In addition to the Rental Market Dynamics study's forward-looking analysis, there is a backward-looking rental dynamics analysis which shows how the 2017 rental housing stock evolved from the 2015 housing stock. Using American Housing Survey data, researchers can identify all sample cases classified as rentals in 2017 and determine their status in 2015. There are 3 broad alternative outcomes here as well. First, some sample cases that were rentals in 2017 also were rentals in 2015 and were in the same affordability category. Secondly, some sample cases that were rentals in 2017 also were rentals in 2015, but were in a different affordability category. Finally, some sample cases that were rentals in 2017 may not have been rentals in 2015. This outcome has several variants, including some 2017 sample cases may have been in the owner stock in 2015. Some 2017 sample cases may have been part of the seasonal or second home stock. Some 2017 sample cases may be new to the American Housing Survey sample since 2015. For rental dynamics purposes, this group is split into two subgroups, newly constructed units and other additions to the stock. This chart illustrates all these alternatives. Instead of counting individual sample cases, it attaches weights to those cases, which allows us to track all 48,743,000 rental units from 2017 back to 2015. This chart shows that same data in percentages. Of the 7,724,000 very low rent units in 2017, approximately 53.9% of the units had very low rent in 2015. 10.4% were more affordable, 23.3% were less affordable, 2.4% were not designated as rentals. Within the group not designated as rentals in 2015, 6.4% of the total 7,724,000 units were part of the owner stock. 4.6% were seasonal or URE units. 0.8% were newly constructed. 0.7% were other additions since 2015. Both of the previous charts allow data users to track how the 2017 rental stock evolved by affordability categories and the total rental housing stock. And both use weights developed for the Components of Inventory Change, or CINCH, study, as rental dynamics analysis is a type of CINCH study. So what else is in the Rental Market Dynamics report? The report includes a section on changes in rental housing between 2015 and 2017, stock level details. This section provides the most straightforward explanation for how the housing stock grew from 2015 to 2017. This section also offers a look at flows within the rental stock among affordability categories. The changes in rental housing between 2015 and 2017 affordability level details section examines net flows into and out of the rental stock and includes the flows between affordable categories. The final section tracks the housing stock, the overall rental housing stock, and the most affordable rental segments over the 2001 to 2017 period. Thank you for listening to this brief overview of the 2015 to 2017 American Housing Survey's Components of Inventory Change and Rental Market Dynamics reports. Now, back to your host, Mr. Sean Buckholtz.
Okay, great. We hope you enjoyed that presentation on the American Housing Survey and the 2015 to 2017 American Housing Survey CINCH and Rental Market Dynamics reports. If you're just joining us, I'm Sean Buckholtz, Head Statistical Officer and Director of Housing and Demographic Analysis at HUD, and I'm your host for today's presentation. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to again remind webinar participants of two things. First, please feel free to post your questions in the question box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. And secondly, the CINCH and Rental Market Dynamics reports are not yet published, but they're expected to be published by the end of August and will be available on HUD's website, www.huduser.com. Okay, joining me now is Dave Vandenbroek, a senior economist at HUD. He developed some of the original techniques for CINCH and the Rental Market Dynamics report when the CINCH program began back in 1992. Since then, Dave has been responsible for overseeing the production of the CINCH and Rental Market Dynamics reports. Welcome, Dave, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Also joining me today is Dr. Catherine Nelson. Kathy is a consultant working with HUD on affordable housing issues. Kathy was an early user of the American Housing Survey data over 25 years while working for and in HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research. Kathy authored the first 8 HUD reports to Congress on worst case needs for rental assistance, and she developed many of the concepts and statistics still used in those biennial reports. Welcome, Kathy, and thank you for joining me today. Okay, Dav, first question for you. Why is HUD concerned about tracing the components of changes in the housing inventory?
Well, we think of housing as something that's static. A structure gets built and it stays there for years and then it's torn down. But in fact, the housing stock is constantly changing in response to consumer demand and external shocks. The same unit serves different people over its lifespan. Units are added and disappear for reasons that are different than just new construction or demolition. Housing units may be converted to non-residential use, such as offices or restaurants, and then change back. Units get remodeled, they get split, they get merged. So CINCH gives us a window into this complexity underlying the housing stock.
All right, great. So a second question for you, Dav. So the CINCH report is a national report, but you and most of our AHS users know that the American Housing Survey includes oversamples of the 15 largest metropolitan areas. Could we also do a CINCH report for those 15 largest metropolitan areas?
Yeah, we could. In fact, we will be releasing 2 metropolitan reports, one on Houston and one on Detroit, that combine the CINCH and the rental dynamics analysis in one shorter volume. We'll be providing a data set that will allow for similar analysis for other metropolitan areas that other users can undertake. Sample sizes for the metro areas run to only about 2,000 cases as opposed to 60,000 for the national survey. And that kind of limits some of the detail you can examine. But the data will be available and can be analyzed at the metropolitan level if people want to do that.
Okay, great. A third question for you, Dav. So do you think there is a central message about housing stocks and flows that you see in the CINCH report?
The biggest thing is that the gross changes in the stock are much bigger than the net changes. And they move in both directions. Many data sources, such as the American Community Survey, allow you to compare totals at different times, see the net change by subtracting one from the other. But CINCH demonstrates that the net change in the housing stock for the number of owner-occupied units, say, is the result of large movements into and out of that stock, or between rental and owned. And so there's more going on in housing than you can see from just subtracting one total from the previous one. There's a lot of churning of units becoming more and less affordable, and you can only really see that through a CINCH kind of analysis.
So speaking of that churning, a fourth question for you. So as you look at the CINCH report, what kind of housing do you see as more likely to leave the stock? And what kind of housing is more likely to be added to the stock?
Well, there aren't real big surprises here. More expensive, large units tend to be added at higher rates than small and low valued units. And losses, the opposite effect. Units that are in poor condition leave the stock at higher rates. Now, if poor condition units stay in the stock, they generally become better quality units. We don't see the same units staying poor quality for year after year. So the percent may stay the same, but they're different units. Single bedroom units are kind of unusual because they are added and they leave the stock at higher rates than average. So there's a lot of churning of single bedroom units in both directions.
Great, interesting. The stock is always evolving. So I want to switch gears here and pose a question to Kathy Nelson. And Kathy, this first question for you is about the CINCH report. So as you look at the CINCH report, what do you see are the main types of changes that occur among the units that remain in the housing stock over each 2-year period? And following up on that, how have the major components of change varied across the US?
I am trying to answer you, but it says that my speaker is not working. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I was very worried. Okay, in terms of changes for units that remained in the stock in both years, as I think Dab just mentioned, both losses and additions were higher for owner-occupied units than for renter units. But obviously they were not in the stock in both years. Of the 82 or so thousand units that were in the stock in both years, only 52,000 had interviews that were completed. So these are partial results. Perhaps the most interesting result, I think, is that the changes were not only much higher from over the 2-year period, were not only much higher for renters, who are always much more likely to move than owners, but also in terms of the income and rent of the occupants. The changes, which are presumably moving, were highest among who were renters with incomes of $75,000. I'm sorry.
Kathy, you're breaking up a little bit, so if you're able to, if you're moving a little bit, if you could stay as still as possible, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. The highest income renters had incomes $50,000 to $80,000, and the change was also highest in the highest rent per month. And I suspect that's consistent with all the other results we've found about their new construction being highest at the higher income and so forth.
All right, appreciate that answer. So switching gears now to focus on the rental market dynamics report. So what does the rental—
I'm sorry, excuse me, Sean. I was supposed to answer your question about differences by location.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Kathy. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please, please do that.
The CINCH doesn't have much information on location. It distinguishes central cities from the rest of the metropolitan area, which would be suburbs. It also identifies micropolitan areas, which I assume are small metropolitan areas, and then the rest of the country, which would be non-metro. And they found very few significant differences among those categories or among the 9 census divisions. The 9 census divisions range from New England in the Northeast to West South Central to Northwestern states like Washington and Seattle. The main difference found by the census divisions were that additions to the stock were highest in the West South Central area, Texas and so forth, suggesting that construction was highest there, and lowest in New England, which is reasonable since New England isn't growing.
All right, appreciate that. And so let's get to that next question there. So switching gears now to the rental market dynamics report. What does the rental market dynamics report tell us about 10-year changes? And did 10-year changes add to the rental stock on net?
Yes, it's interesting here. The changes show that 4.4 million of the rental units became owner occupied, and 3.7 million owner units became rental, so that essentially there was a loss of rental units, 700,000. There was a lot of movement to and from whether or not there were rental or owner units, and whether or not they went to the second home seasonal units, basically balanced 2 million in, 2 million out. The main net increase for rental units were that 1.5 million were added, whereas 800,000 were lost.
Okay, thanks for that answer. So what does the rental market dynamics report tell us about the short-term and long-term trends in rental affordability?
In the short term, in terms of policies and concern about rental affordability, we're most concerned about the lowest rent categories that are identified, the non-market ones, which are subsidized or no rent at all, and the extremely low income rent. And we found that the non-market lost 100,000 units to owners and 32,000 to seasonal, but gained 1.3 million from higher rent units, which I was surprised to see. So that basically was a growth in this non-market category over the 2 years. The extremely low rent category, which was affordable to renters with incomes below 30% of median, was up 575,000 from filtering down from higher rent units, and also gained 37 on net from owners. The next affordability category up, though, the very low income rent range, dropped 1.6 million, which was a lot. And then looking at new construction, not surprisingly, I think Dav mentioned this, it was mainly at the highest rent levels. There wasn't much new construction at the lower rent levels. One of the things I particularly looked at was how much new construction there was to the rents affordable between 50 and 60% of area median income, because that's the range that the low income housing tax credit might add. And there was more new construction there than in rents below 50% of median, but not much. In terms of long-term trends, that was the short-term trends, sorry. So the short-term trends, to summarize, are basically that the very lowest categories actually gained, but the very low income rents and the next category up, the low rents, so that's rents affordable between 30 and 60% of median, fell. The report doesn't have very much at all on long run trends, which were, I don't remember what the table was from in the report, but one thing that was striking though was about it had changes over every 2-year period, 01, 03, 05, et cetera, et cetera. There was definite loss of both of the two lowest lowest rent categories, excuse me, between 07 and 09, reflecting the financial crisis in 08. And that loss of extremely and very low rent units had not recovered by 2017. There was also a striking rise in renters after 08. They had been about 30, in high rent units, there had been about 31% of the stock, whereas by 2017, it's 36% of the stock. And the only other rent category shown in that in the trend was the above 50, and consistent with all the other I've found that of a switch from low rents to high rents, the growth there was much faster. Now, there's the slide that's on your screen is one I prepared in order to try to look at a little more breakdown of the different rental affordability categories had meant. The middle panel, where it says affordable units in thousands, show not quite the same rent ranges, extremely low below 30, very low 30 to 50. Low income here is 50 to 80, and then the middle income is above 80%. And as you see, over the period from 2001 to 2017, essentially the long-term trends there are quite similar to the short-run trends, in that there was growth of 16% in the extremely low rent category, and there was an actual decrease of basically a minus 32% in that very low rent category. In the 50 to 80% of median range, there was respectable growth of 44%, but the middle income or higher tripled from 4 million to over 12 million. So that was quite a market shift over 16 years. My concern about affordability in the rental dynamics report is that it doesn't say anything about what's going on with renters. And so the top panel in that table shows what's happened with renter households. Again, the growth, there's sort of bifurcation. The extremely low income renters grew by a third, 32%, so faster than the units affordable to them. The very low income renters stayed about the same, and the low income grew by 19%. I didn't show the upper income there, but they grew by 50%, from 11 million to 17 million. So that was where the respectable growth occurred. And the bottom panel shows why we then are concerned about shortages in affordable housing. Because many renters, everybody likes a good deal. Many renters pay less than their 30% of their income for rent. So higher income renters often live in units that are more affordable to them and pay less than 30% of their income. And so you see there in the bottom panel that for among the lowest income group, extremely low income renters, in 2001, there were only 44 units that were both affordable and actually available to them. Available meaning they were occupied by those extremely low income renters or were vacant. And that shortage got slightly worse over the 16 years, going from 44 to 40. The shortage
Kathy, I apologize. I'm gonna have to cut you off because we're running a little long, and I want to have some time for the Q&A. So I'm gonna transition now to the.
May I say one more sentence, actually, which is that if you look at the 106 and the 97, basically by the time you get up to the 80% of median income cutoff, there's enough units for all the people who need them. Now cut me off. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So thank you both, Kathy and Dav, for your insightful answers on these questions. I also once again want to give a big thanks to Fred Eggers and Fawad Momin of the consulting firm Econometrica. They are the primary authors on the CINCH and rental market dynamics reports. They've just done a fantastic job for us. All right. So I want to transition now to the Q&A section. And I want to, as I scroll through the questions here, first question I want to throw out here, and Dav, I'm going to direct this one to you. Is there a distinction made between manufactured homes and mobile homes in the AHS and CINCH data?
No, we use the two the same. I do understand that the formal name is manufactured homes, and that mobile homes has a connotation that not everybody likes. But we tend to use them as the same thing. They're both homes that have a HUD code, a HUD medallion, and thus are inspected according to HUD safety standards rather than local standards. But we mean the same thing by them.
Okay, thanks. And another question for you, Dav. So can you explain how the AHS handles, quote, other vacant units? For instance, in the ACS for 2018, there were 6.2 million of these other vacant units, which webinar participant notes was up dramatically from a similar measure in the 2000 census. So how do we handle other vacant units in the AHS?
Well, vacant units are always a difficult problem for survey because there's nobody there. And so it's hard to find out what's going on with them. AHS was not in the field in 18, so we'll see what happens in the 19 survey when the data come out a little bit later in the fall. But basically, when a field representative cannot make contact with a household because there's nobody there, and they've made a visit to confirm that, they're instructed to find a knowledgeable person, preferably the manager or the owner of the rental unit, to find out the status of the unit and why it's vacant. And so we take whatever information that we can, and if it doesn't fit one of the standard categories, we have to call it other vacant. So it's a category for we don't quite know what's going on there.
Okay, we got just a couple minutes left. We've got a number of questions about if this presentation will be emailed out or when it's going to be posted. So we expect to be able to post this full presentation within the next 2 weeks. If you were alerted to this webinar by way of the AHS listserv, you can rest assured we will send out a message on the AHS listserv announcing when the presentation is going to be posted. And we will also have a couple messages on social media for those of you who get your information through Twitter. So on behalf of HUD, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's presentation on the American Housing Survey 2015 to 2017 Components and Inventory Change and Rental Market Dynamics Reports. We hope this information has given you some ideas about how you can use the American Housing Survey data to examine changes in the U.S. housing stock and the rental market dynamics. These two reports are just a few of the ways HUD is working to make the American Housing Survey data as easy as possible for you to work with. Thank you to Dav, Kathy, and all the webinar participants. Take care.